I was a kid home alone, and a fake Girl Scout cookie salesman wouldn't leave. Years ago, when I was 11, I was staying home alone with only my little brother who was 7. At that time, it was about 9 p.m, dark and pouring rain, and we were reading in our room, right next to the front door with a big window and open blinds. That's when I hear the front doorbell ring, followed by knocking. I thought my parents had arrived. Strange though that they didn't use the garage or their keys. I looked outside to see their car. Nothing but rain. As I approached the door, I hear a man's voice that was not my father's yell through the torrent. "Would you like some cookies? We're selling Girl Scout cookies." I'm shocked at this, considering the weather and time of day. Saying nothing, I checked the peephole and peered through the side window, only to see it was not a father with his girl as I expected. My heart dropped. Standing there was just a fully grown man, maybe in his late 50s. No box of cookies in sight, soaking on my doorstep. I can remember the gut-wrenching feeling of having to check the locks while he was right on the other side. For sure, he heard this. The 2 locks were the only things separating myself and brother from a potential monster. He continued to knock and mention his cookies, as I considered calling the cops. That's when I remembered the blinds were open in my room where my brother's was, with the lights on. As I turn the corner into the doorway, I see the man carefully peering into our window, possibly eyeing my brother, distracted in his book. My heart was pounding now, as I began to panic. In a move that took all of my willpower, I quickly turned off the lights and ran over to the window to close the blinds. In full view of the man, as fast as I could, I double-checked all the locks in the house, closed all the blinds, and told my brother to go hang out in one of the big closets in the interior of the house. No windows. I didn't tell him what was going on, so he wouldn't be frightened. And for some reason, I never did call the cops or my parents. I just waited in the hallway until he left. Still thinking about it gives me shivers that so many things could have gone wrong that night. My worst fear since is a stranger getting to the unlocked door before I do. Home alone, I let a man in to read our upstairs gas meter. I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes like the host of Blue Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room, the typical girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God, my sister came down the stairs at almost the exact moment. She said, "Oh, Is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs? And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, who is that? I said. He's here to read the gas meter. Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had cell phones and obviously weren't going back in the house to call authorities on the landline phone. Then my ever resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house, "Oh Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge, and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone and authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay. Though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and say she'd been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but fear not. He was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s. So in any case, he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action. False meter reader, let's not meet. 2 men tried to break in while my friend and I were home alone. I was listening to one of the creepy narrators who narrates L&M stories, and one story reminded me of a really scary encounter I had when I was 13. My parents divorced when I was in the 8th grade, and after my dad moved out, my mum was very single and ready to mingle, so she often left me home alone. I would usually have someone stay the night on nights I knew my mum wasn't coming home, so I wasn't totally alone. So one night my friend and I, who I'll call Jesse for the story, was staying in the night, and for some reason we had the best internet connection in the garage. So we were in there just messing around on MySpace and such when we started hearing what sounded like 2 people talking. Jesse and I stopped talking and were trying to hear what the people were saying. We got up and stood by the garage door. but we still couldn't make it out. So we went inside and looked through the peephole on my front door. There were two men standing in my driveway by my garage looking around. I immediately freaked out because they weren't standing on the sidewalk or anything. They were standing by my garage, like they lived at my house. I stood there watching them for a minute before one of them started walking up to the door. I quickly, but very quietly, checked to make sure both locks were locked and then looked back out the peephole. The man was leaning over to the side railing on the porch, trying to look into my mum's bedroom window. I instantly signaled to Jesse to go get knives and be super silent. I looked back outside and the two men were back by the garage talking. Jesse asked what had happened and I just told her to go make sure the doors were locked while I kept watch. She came back quietly and we switched. She kept watch while I looked for the house phone. This was before it was the norm for young teens to have cell phones. All of a sudden she says, "They're leaving." My heart sank because something in my gut just told me they weren't. Without even thinking, I asked her, "Did you lock the side door in the garage?" And she said she didn't. I took off through the kitchen into the garage just as I heard our side gate open. I made it to the door and locked the deadbolt before I could get the doorknob locked. And as soon as I flipped the lock, the doorknob twisted. I thought I was going to puke. I grabbed the handle and locked it before running back inside and locking the garage door. I ran to the back door and at that point just started yelling, "Lock the windows!" My back door had these sheer curtains over them where you were still able to see inside and outside, and before I was able to make it to the locked door, I saw someone walk up the back porch. I jumped behind the couch and watched as he tried to open the back door before the second guy followed. Jessie came walking into the living room and I grabbed her and pulled her down behind the couch with me. We both just sat there in silence, terrified, watching these two guys trying to figure out how to get in. I started to cry and Jessie was just sitting there shaking. After what seemed like forever, they walked off the back porch and into the backyard. We heard them banging around before we saw them walk back by the porch and out the side gate. I ran to the front and looked through the peephole again and saw them walk across the street and get into a car. I told Jessie they were gone. We both burst into tears and just started hugging each other. We called her aunt and she came and picked us up and took us to her house where we stayed the night there. We never told anyone because we thought we would be in trouble for some reason. But after that, I didn't stay home alone for years. But even at 25, I still get scared when it's just my daughter and I home alone while my husband is at work, or the rare occasion when he goes out with friends. We're lucky it didn't end worse than it did, but I'm still scarred from it 12 years later. So men who try to break into my house and who knows what else, let's not meet. 2 a.m. home alone and a really weird experience. Hi, I am new to the subreddit, but I have quite a few stories to share. Be it my own experiences or my parents' experiences. Needless to say, here is the one of the most interesting ones of the lot. I was 14 at the time of this, so keep that in mind for context. I was sat on my bed in my house, on my own, as usual. My parents were going to be out for the night, and we lived in a peaceful area. So even the strictest parents would have let their son watch over the house. As I was on my laptop watching videos, I hear a knock from the door. Mind you, this was 2 a.m. and I was already paranoid from my previous experiences. There was no way I was going to answer that door, but my curiosity was piqued. Since my house has 2 floors, there was a window right above the door which I could pull these blinds up to a slit to see who was at the door. My porch light was on, so light wasn't too much of a problem. Even though my paranoia peaked, I had a look to see who was outside. When I looked, there was nobody at all. I was about to just place the blind down when I saw someone under the light at the end of the cul-de-sac close and almost jumped backwards. This person was in a conveniently suspicious looking hoodie and tracksuit, with no light showing his facial features. His arms were to his sides, and he was staring directly at me. It was weird. He didn't move at all. He just stood there, under the light. After what seemed like 10 minutes, he just turned around and walked into the darkness of the main street. I sighed and went back to watching videos. Perhaps he was just some weird guy who came from the train station near my house. I had no idea, but any justification was better than the alternative. Eventually, around 3 a.m, I fell asleep. I woke up about 4:40 to the sound of my dog silently growling behind me. I thought it was because he wanted to go out into the garden, so I turned around and froze in terror. The person from the street, he was in my doorway. No light hit him from the front, so even though I could only make out an outline of his face, we had another moment where I just stared into the void which was his face, only for him to break the silence with advice which seemed silly at first glance, but I have took it to heart since. Lock your back door. And as he did last time, he turned around towards the stairs, and with me still frozen in place, left my house through the back door. When I wasn't frozen stiff with fear, I sprinted downstairs and got to the back door. He was in the garden. I could only see his outline. He stayed still for a moment, only to sprint off into the woods. I never found out who he was. I didn't care to tell my parents what happened, and yet to this day they still ask why I insist on keeping the back door locked. Honestly, I believe he was warning me. If he had been an unstable psychopath, I wouldn't be here right now. Considering some experiences I have had since, I say locking your doors, even in peaceful areas, is great advice. So 2 a.m. security checker, thank you. Even if your intention was bad, I still learned something from you. But even so, let's not meet. I live in northern Iraq. I have seen many things. Before I go any further, I should describe myself a bit. I was born in the States and I was raised around people who believe that we are not alone in this universe. I believe that children hold a certain type of intuition that many of us have either lost or chosen to ignore. When I was 17, we visited my father's family in a village in northern Iraq. It was during this visit that my view on life changed forever. In the summer of 2009, my family traveled to Iraq quite a few years after the war was over. My father hadn't seen his side of the family in over 20 years and figured it was the perfect time for us to meet them and learn about our culture. Iraq back in 2009 was just as terrible as you could imagine it'd be. Hot, no electricity, terror groups running around. But I was excited to explore such an ancient country. Dark history has always fascinated me. One night, my entire family had walked 2 blocks down to visit my cousin at her house. I said I would meet them up because I was still getting ready. When I was done, I took 2 of my boy cousins with me. One was 4 years old and the other was barely 2, so I had to carry him. Exactly behind our house is an abandoned house the residents of the village refer to as the Jinn house. Jinn in Arabic means genie, but not the one that grants wishes. Jinns are almost always bad and do terrible things to scare and harm people. The story behind this house is that multiple families had tried to move into the house, but were either scared out of the house or a tragedy would occur that would make them move out. The last tenants of the house suffered a lot. At first, it was just silly things like waking up with the TV upside down. Then every morning, most of their furniture would be outside of the house. The younger son began sleepwalking, and my own cousins have seen him sleepwalking to the cemetery and back at night. One night, the boy was sleepwalking, picked up a gun and killed one of his sisters. The house caught on fire and the family had to run out. The boy doesn't remember anything and the remaining sister is now medically insane. Anyway, I took the 2 boys and started walking past the Jinn house because it was the only way I knew to get to my cousin's house. The 2-year-old was in my arms and the 4-year-old was holding my left hand and walking with me. Walking past the Jinn house, which was on my left, I tried not to look at it because it really freaked me out. There were a bunch of broken TV sets all around the house and all the windows were busted, but something made me look. On the roof of the house, I saw something that could only be explained as having the body of a donkey, but the way it was sitting looked exactly how a cat would sit. I stared at it for probably 10 seconds, when both of the little boys started to scream at the same time. The 2-year-old was facing behind me since I was holding him up on my chest, so there was no way he saw what I was seeing. I felt as though he said something was not right. The longer I looked at the thing, I began to notice that it had these eyes that were not any color I could explain. They weren't visible in the dark, but at the same time, I saw right into them. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It started to stand up, and that's when I picked up the 4-year-old who was screaming bloody murder and ran as fast as I could away from that thing. I didn't tell any of my family about what happened because I didn't want to remember what I saw or let my brain process the memory anymore that I already had. I know what I saw, and I feel like it's something above human understanding. Whatever I saw that day, I know that in the moment of looking at it, it was shifting its form. It was not solid like you and me. Its shape was constantly changing while remaining the same. It didn't have to show itself in its entirety for me to see what it was. I know it doesn't make any sense, but I truly believe I saw something that is not from this world. And that's why I had trouble understanding what I was seeing. It's been 6 years since then, and I ended up moving to Iraq the year after this happened. I've gone back to the house multiple times, but I haven't seen the figure since that day. I still feel a presence, even though it's been abandoned for years. I've seen some really weird things here, and I don't have logical explanations for anything I've seen so far. Edit. I have uploaded a picture I took of the house back in 2010 on an old crappy phone camera, and here it is. A jinn possession in Erbil. This happened to my best friend's aunt, and I have met the aunt on a few occasions. For the record, I do not believe she has any mental issues such as schizophrenia, but I'm also not a psychiatrist. My best friend started by telling me that Sarah was once possessed by a jinn, and they had tried many things to rid her of the jinn, but nothing was working until they met with a mullah, a Muslim priest, who helped the aunt through painful exorcisms which lasted about 5 months. When it all started, Sarah started to act different slowly. First it was randomly insulting Allah and the Prophet, and refusing to pray when she was religious before. Then it became worse when she would start to hurt her children, and then cry about it a few minutes later, saying that there is something inside of her. Her hair started falling out, and when she touched the Quran, she would begin screaming. She would go missing for days, and when they asked her where she was, she couldn't answer them. And it had happened in front of my friend's eyes a few times. That burn marks would appear randomly on her skin with the word disbeliever, as if someone was burning her from the inside. They ended up calling a mullah because medicine and psychiatrists had no idea what was wrong, and the mullah put her into a sort of trance to discover that she was in fact possessed by a jinn. He asked the jinn to leave her, but he said that he could not because he was being controlled by a more powerful jinn, the one who the curse called upon. He told the family that in the jinn world, lesser jinn are controlled by more powerful ones. Usually, the lesser jinn are nicer and will not hurt people unless they are controlled by another jinn who they fear. In Sarah's case, she was being controlled by 2 jinn, lesser and greater. After a month or so, the mullah was able to convert the lesser jinn to Islam by saying that what he's doing to this woman is wrong and he will be punished. And so once the lesser jinn let go of his control on the aunt, the more powerful one emerged and appeared to be entertained. Once the trials had ended, Sarah was just laughing and laughing until she spoke with a very deep voice none of them ever heard before. He told the mullah that he will not leave Sarah and that he doesn't fear God or bargain with humans. And it was this jinn who had told him how she was cursed. Of course, no one believed it, but because it seemed a bit crazy that this thing would admit how it possessed her. It said that Sarah was cursed by a woman who lived in the apartment below them, most likely out of jealousy because the aunt is wealthy. The curse had been placed inside of her favorite dress, and each time she would wear the dress, the curse would repeat and become stronger. And the mullah proved it to be true. In Islam, the most haram, forbidden thing we can do is write the Quran backwards. The mullah made Sarah eat dates and yogurt, which are considered pure food in Islam, because our Prophet would break his fast with these foods. She couldn't stomach the food and would end up throwing up pieces of paper. After a week, the mullah put all of the paper together to reveal a few verses of the Quran that were written backwards. Once all the paper had been expelled from her body, she went back to normal almost instantly. But she has no memory of what happened during those months, and all the burns on her body disappeared. The woman who lived below them moved houses while the mullah was performing exorcisms, and Sarah has since thrown the dress away. She hasn't had any outbursts since seeing the mullah, so almost all of us believe that she truly was possessed. Crappy next door neighbor. This is my first time posting on this sub, so bear with me. When I was about 16 or so years ago, my family moved from a rough part of the state to a nice city. It was typical suburban bliss, white fences, picturesque homes, all with nice lush yards. My sister and I were about 12 and 4 when we moved. Our next door neighbor, Jean, was an older man in his late 60s, early 70s, who had just recently married Catherine, another woman in her mid 60s. My parents were friendly with Jean and got the notion that Catherine and Jean had been married before, which wasn't a big deal, but plays into the story later. I always got the creepy vibe from Jean. One of my best friends lived in the house behind me, so I often passed Jean's house to visit her home house. Jean's favorite hobby was to sit on a lawn chair in his driveway, and every time I passed, he made it a point to talk to me, more so than the friendly neighborhood talk. One time, I was about 6. I was walking past and he called me over. "Come look at these pictures," Jean said, and I cautiously headed over. It was a thick stack of pictures of children playing. Even at 6, I thought it was a little strange. Why was an adult showing me pictures of other children? I mentioned it to my parents later, and they told me that it was most likely Jean's grandchildren, and being only 6, I didn't think much of it. Fast forward a bit, and this is where the story gets really creepy. I avoided Jean as much as I could in this time period, and save for the occasional creepy encounter. It was fine living next door to him. This occurred when I was around 12, and my sister was 19 or so. My sister developed very young and by 19 was extremely curvy. At 12 I hadn't even really developed yet. I was still a beanpole. On a hot summer's day, my sister and I liked to play badminton with the sprinkler spraying us in the backyard. Since we are getting wet, we wore our bikinis to play. It was innocent and fun, and we played almost daily. A few days after we played, my sister pulled me aside. "Jean's in his camper," she whispered to me. I looked over. Jean had a massive trailer that was so big, the windows could still probably peek over our fence. Sure enough, the door was shut, but the windows to the camper were open, and Jean was watching us play badminton. This occurred almost daily when we were playing. Jean would come out, watch us play in his air-conditioned trailer, and shortly after we went in, he would too. Then one day we were playing, knowing Jean was watching us, but somehow hoping we were mistaken, when Jean popped his head up over the fence. My oldest sister had a heart attack, but cautiously walked over to Jane. "Is this your birdie?" Jean asked, holding up a bright purple birdie. "It came over my fence." My sister shook her head. "That's not our birdie. Our birdies are only blue and green," she told him. We had bought them in a set. We had no purple birdies. "Well, I've got a bunch of them over here. Come get them," Jean said. My sister politely declined, then told me we were done playing for the day. My sister and I instantly knew that Jean watched us play, then had gone out, purchased a set full of birdies to talk to us, and most likely lure us over to his house. After that, we stopped playing badminton. We later on learned that Jean had kissed one of our neighbours on the mouth right in front of her husband, and that Catherine wasn't his second wife. She was his eighth, and he ended up divorcing Catherine to marry a woman in her 20s. He moved away from next door, and my sister and I have never been so relieved. Neighbours. I've recently moved to a new area due to my work, and is far away from my family and friends. It's a weird cul-de-sac area. I'm currently working on finding friends here, but I work Monday to Friday and go visit my parents on the weekends, so it's very hectic. I start at 7 AM and finish around 6 or 7 at night, so you can imagine that when I get home, I just want to eat and go to sleep. One day I came home and there's an old couple standing outside my door. They introduced themselves as the couple that lives directly opposite my house, and even hand me some home cooked dinner. I say thank you and mention that I would invite them in, but there's still a lot of boxes everywhere, and I was quite embarrassed. I say I've moved to a new city on my own, due for work. We small talk for a few more seconds, and I'm soon inside my house. I honestly put the food that they have given me in the fridge, and think I'll head straight to bed. In the morning, I see the food that they've given me half eaten, and now in the sink. I must have been way too tired last night to remember eating this. The next night, I'm coming home from work and seeing the old lady waving at me from her kitchen window. I vaguely wave back and head inside. Nothing else happens that night. The next night, I've had the worst day ever at work. I had to stay behind work half an hour overdue to an unhappy customer, and have been craving my bed all day. I pull up outside my house and see the old couple standing outside their house. Are they keeping a record of what times I come home? I quickly ask myself. I'm honestly not in the mood for creepy ass neighbors and making small talk again. I didn't know these people, and I don't know or understand why they're trying to socialize with me. Plus the day I've had, I'm not in the best of moods. I brace myself for the lame conversation that I'm about to have. Getting out my car, I just wave generally in their direction and start fumbling in my purse to find the keys to my front door. "Excuse me, miss. Come over for some dinner. You look so tired," the old lady is saying to me. I vaguely say something about me being too tired while generally getting annoyed. They wouldn't hold up. I open my door and just about to step in. The old guy comes across the road and even places his hand on my arm, looks me dead in my eyes and says something cheery about how his wife makes the best pie. Okay, whatever. I thought I'll go over for a cup of tea and some pie and nicely try and explain to them that I've had a bad day and that I should be heading off. Hopefully they will take the hint. After shutting my door and stepping into their house, the old guy slams the door shut and locks it. They both proceed to tell me that around 7:30 they were looking out the windows for me to give me some chicken stir fry that they had cooked and saved for me that night. They both clearly saw a man standing in my bedroom window walk downstairs and could see him in the living room window walk into the kitchen. They said that they saw my car come into the cul-de-sac and saw him rush back past the living room window and obviously up the stairs. They had called the police and had tried to stop me from entering my house. Whoever it was clearly upstairs hiding somewhere. My heart fell. I felt dizzy. I glanced to my bedroom window expecting to see someone there, but nothing was there. Just the curtains wide open. The police turned up shortly after. I had to wait outside while they searched the house. In the crawl space, right outside my bedroom door, they had found a homeless man curled up. He had been living there for the last 2-ish weeks, and according to him, he had snuck in when the moving packers had left the door open while struggling with something. He had been in the house watching me while I had been asleep and would come out while I was at work and away for the weekends. Neighbor attacks over my dog's bark. Neighbor wants to attack my father over our dog. 4 years ago, when I was 15, me and my parents moved to a new apartment and we decided to get a puppy. We would walk him 4 or 5 times a day, but we still struggled a lot with my dog's separation anxiety. So I imagine for the first weeks it must have been hell to my neighbors because he would bark and cry whenever we left him alone. However, every time we talked to my neighbors, they would just tell us to not worry about it because they hardly hurt my dog and everyone was fine with it except for Tony. One Saturday I was home alone and someone knocked on my door. It was Tony. At first he just looked somewhat surprised to see me open the door, but then he just smiled politely and said, "Can you tell your parents to come see me when they get home, please?" I said yes, and he left. I thought nothing of it. When my parents came home, I told them about my encounter with Tony, and my dad went to his apartment, suspecting it had something to do with my dog barking. Tony told my dad that he was a baker, so he worked during the night and needed to sleep during the day, so he would appreciate if we could find a way to make less noise. Although he understood it was hard to control a dog's bark. He also apologized to show up at our door, saying he didn't know I was alone in there. My dad and him had a nice, polite conversation. My father apologized for the inconvenience and came home, and we did our best to deal with my puppy's anxiety. And it worked. My dog, of course, still barked, but wasn't so agitated as he used to be. Fast forward a few weeks. Every time my dog sensed Tony going down the stairs of our apartment building, my dog would go nuts. He was a fairly friendly dog towards people, but he absolutely hated this guy. And Tony had stopped talking to us, ignoring us every time we ran into him, or he would simply just stare at us. One day, me and my mother came home and our apartment door was 6 holes, like if someone had punched the door with a key or something sharp. My mother, very naive, thought maybe we had done that damage ourselves throughout the months. That's when Martha, one of our other neighbors, calls my mother, worried about me, questioning her if I had been home alone during the afternoon. My mum said no. That's when Martha tells us that someone came banging and kicking at our door while screaming a bunch of insults, making a scene so terrifying that her 11-year-old son got so scared he hid under his bed for 4 hours until Martha came home because he thought someone was breaking into our house. A few weeks later, there was a city fair at night, and my parents and I, plus Martha and her family, headed out of the building to go to the fun fair. We came back earlier, around 11 PM. At almost 12 AM, someone rang our doorbell. My dad went to see who it was, but no one responded. Usually when this happens, we either go to the window to try and see who it is, or we go downstairs, because it usually is the mailman. But since it was midnight, my dad found it very strange and didn't go downstairs. He ignored it and we all went to bed. Well, the next morning, my mother runs into Martha and she tells my mum that when they came back from the fair, they found Tony hidden in the dark under the stairs with a freaking baseball bat on his hands. He looked nervous, but said someone had rang the doorbell, and he found it weird that someone would do that so late at night, so he had to come downstairs to see who it was with a baseball bat. My mum immediately knew what happened. He had rang our doorbell expecting my dad to come downstairs to see who it was. I don't know if his plan was to attack my dad, but my father, worrying about me and my mother's safety, since he wasn't home during the week, went upstairs fuming and knocked on Tony's door. When he saw my father, I swear he almost passed out. My father confronted him and Tony started crying. He said he sometimes did drugs and didn't know what he was doing. Apologized for damaging our door with a pocket knife and for what had happened the night before. He couldn't even lie. Turns out the reason my dog freaked out when he sensed him and barked so much was because Tony waited until everyone in the building had left for work and went to my door and kicked it, making my dog more furious each time, and not so much because of his anxiety. My dad said very calmly, "This is the last time I will talk to you. Next time you come near or even look in the direction of my family again, I will make sure to make my point clear. Do you understand?" The guy kept crying and trying to hug my dad. We went to the police and filed a report. We stopped seeing Tony. Turns out his wife kicked him out and filed a restraining order for her and their daughter because one morning she woke up with him staring at her and their daughter sleeping, and the whole house smelled like gas because he had left the stove on. We moved shortly afterwards. So Tony, let's not meet. My next door neighbor was a murderer. When I was in year 1, so 5 or 6 years old, I lived next door to this woman and her daughter, who was the same age as me, and in the same school. Her daughter was called Holly, and all I can remember about her appearance is that she had blonde hair. As there was a very low wall between our two gardens, I would often see and talk to Holly, and we became friends. She would jump over the wall and play in my garden, and I would go over to her house. She was a nice girl, as far as I can remember. When I noticed over a couple of months of being friends with Holly was that Holly's mother would frequently change boyfriends, and the guys would actually live in the house with them. One day, over at Holly's house, I met one of her mother's new boyfriends. I can barely remember what he looked like, but he took me and Holly into the garden and gave us skipping ropes and other toys, and watched us, supervised us while we played with them. He joined in skipping once. It was very cold, like he really didn't like me or us. I think he might have been doing it to impress Holly's mother. A few days later, or weeks, I don't remember, I was in my own garden with my mother when I heard the man and woman arguing next door. The guy was very loud and aggressive, telling her to get in the bloody car, and that was how I learned the F word. Throughout the weeks that the boyfriend was around, I noticed that Holly was getting odder in the way that she acted and the things she would say. She also tried to get me to do dangerous things like climb fences and stuff. I remember once in school she tried to pick me up and then threw me down, making me bleed. Then one day a whole load of police showed up and kicked down my neighbor's door. I didn't see any of this but heard it. Turns out the woman's latest boyfriend, the guy who played skipping with me, got arrested for killing some woman, or more than one, and making Holly assist with selling drugs or something along those lines. I never played with or talked to Holly again. Not really sure what happened to her. And the house's door is still dodgy from being kicked down. It just feels weird that I could run into Holly again in the future and not recognize her. I guess I could have already. My neighbors. I live in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by fields. We've had the same neighbors on both sides of our flat for years. This story is about the neighbors on our right. I have never seen them myself, but my mum claims to have seen them a few times. They rarely say anything about themselves whenever my mum tries to strike up a conversation, so my mum never told them much about us either. All we knew back then was that they were a couple in their 40s with no children. I shall call them John and Jane for now. 3 weeks ago on a Friday, Jane had casually said to my mum that she had seen me. She described what I looked like quite accurately. My mum didn't find this unusual at all, except that I remember clearly that I had never left the house on that day. The curtains were always closed, so she couldn't have seen me through a window. I brushed it off, thinking that maybe Jane had seen me some other time and confused the dates. On the following day, my mum and I saw a guy waiting on their lawn with tons of boxes and luggage. He appeared to be a college student just moving into a rented flat. My mum asked if he knew my neighbors, and he told us that he was waiting for his dad John to get home and help him move in. We found this unusual due to the fact that we always thought that John and Jane didn't have kids, and also because students were usually moving out of their homes to their dorms at this time of year. I tried to casually ask him what school he went to, and he said the name of a university that Google says did not exist. My dad came out by that time and saw what was going on and offered to help him move his boxes out of their driveway. He quickly refused with a loud no, and my dad backed off. We went back inside our flat after that. After an hour later, my mum went back outside to do her usual gardening routine on her front lawn. She noticed that our neighbour's front yard and driveway were vacant. The student and boxes had vanished. Since then, we never saw my neighbours again. I still wonder what could have been in those boxes. The peculiar Emily Valentine. Have you ever met someone so strange that they were fascinating? I have. 15 years ago, at the start of sophomore year in high school, I entered my first period, science class, and was met with relief when I saw my friend Jessica in the same class. While I wouldn't have called myself popular, I did have a core of friends that I always spent time with. There was Jessica, as I said, Celine, Lindsay, and Lizzie. The first day of school was always tough because you never knew if you had any classes with any of your friends until you stepped foot in the classroom. I remember this particular day a lot, better due to the circumstances surrounding it. We had a new student. My school was pretty small, so when a new student entered the fold, it was kind of a big deal. One Mr. Fitzpatrick stood at the front of the class and introduced the new student. I was intrigued to see who he or she was. After a few moments, Mr. Fitzpatrick had to go outside and walk her into the room, as it was obvious she was nervous. She was a very shy young woman, about 5 feet tall, with long straight black hair that fell to her bottom. She hung her head low into her books. Her name was Emily Valentine. Emily didn't say much, but Mr. Fitzpatrick sat her next to Jessica and I, because we were two of the nicer girls in the classroom. While the last thing I wanted to do was mentor the new girl, I smiled and nodded my head as Mr. Fitzpatrick pointed at her chair. I tried to make conversation with Emily, as did Jessica, but she wouldn't talk at all. It was as if she were afraid to talk. I understand being shy, but this was a bit different, to say the least. I compared my schedule to Emily's and realized that we had virtually every class in the same order. I was a bit dumbfounded. After first period science came our math class, my most dreaded class. Our math teacher, Mrs. Bautista, was the biggest bee I had ever met. She was notorious around our town, and her nickname was the Bee from Boston, as she had a very heavy Boston accent. I told Emily about Mrs. Bautista and what to expect, but she just nodded. I did not say a word. The rest of the day went pretty well. I walked Emily around the school, showed her the bathrooms and some of the chill spots during lunch. When the first bell rang, I grabbed my stuff and went to leave, but Emily grabbed my arm and stopped me. It was a bit out of character for her, but I smiled and asked her what she wanted. Once more, she didn't talk, but she handed me a folded piece of paper and went on her way. As I unfolded the paper, I read the note aloud. "Thank you." I smiled and breathed a sigh of relief. As I left school and headed home, throughout the rest of the year, Emily never uttered a word. She never spoke in class or anything, but her and I became friends. We communicated over notes back and forth and got to know each other. Right before Thanksgiving break, Emily handed me a note that asked me to come over after school for a sleepover. While I had my reservations, perhaps this would be a great time to learn more about Emily. And hell, maybe she'd talk to me finally. After school, Emily and I drove to her house. She pointed where I needed to go. What I saw was a really beaten down house with various cardboard boxes in the windows. The smell alone almost made me gag. When I entered the house, my nostrils were overwhelmed with the smell of rotting food and urine. I tried my best to hold my breath and not offend Emily, but Jesus Christ, it was hard. Emily directed me to her room, but I noticed that there were no signs of anyone else in the home. No mother, father, brother, or sister to be found. As we entered Emily's room, it was cluttered with paper plates, old food, cans, and water bottles. Her bed lay on the floor, stained with mold. She pointed at a small cot to the side and nodded her head. Reluctantly, I sat on the cot and watched as Emily sat on her bed. She lay down, turned off the lights, and proceeded to lay in silence. "Are we sleeping, Emily?" "Surely we wouldn't be sleeping now, right?" It was barely 4 in the afternoon. As I expected, Emily did not say a word and laid on her bed, staring at the ceiling. I sat on my cot for hours, just trying to pass the time. I started to think of ways to leave without being rude, and eventually asked Emily where the bathroom was. She didn't answer, shockingly, but didn't respond physically either. She was sound asleep in the same position she was hours ago. Slowly, I stood up from my cot and quietly made my way out of her room. I should have just left and never looked back. I really should have, but curiosity got the better of me. I started to look around the house, trying to see if I could find anything either interesting or peculiar. At the end of the messy kitchen was a door to the right that led to the basement. To my amazement, the basement door was unlocked, and I decided to take a look down there. I know I was stupid for doing this, but I was a 16-year-old girl who didn't know any better. Looking back 15 years ago, I wish I had a time machine to prevent this. But what I found down there was something I'll never forget. The further I walked down the basement, the more intense the smell became. Urine, feces, you name it, I smelled it. I cut my nose with my shirt and turned the corner and almost shrieked with what I saw. Chained on a cot was a skeleton of what looked like a human being. The same kind of cot that I was sitting on just moments ago. I cut my mouth to muffle my screams. I went to leave the house as soon as I could. But as I went back up the stairs. I heard the door slam and the sound of the door locking. I began to panic and frantically search for a way out, but the basement had no escape that I could see. The only window in the basement was a small 1 foot by 1 foot window at the upper part of the wall, nearly 7 feet tall. Being just over 5 feet, I could not reach the window. Thinking of my feet, I grabbed the cot that the skeleton laid on and dragged it near the wall so I could stand on it and look through the window. The window was cloudy, but I could see the outside. I pounded on the window and screamed for help, but I know my cries were falling on deaf ears. I wrapped my shirt around my arm and fist and pounded the window as hard as I could until I eventually busted the glass. The window was only a foot wide at most, and a piece of glass was still attached at the sides. I summoned all my strength and tried to push myself through the window. The shards of glass were cutting my sides, but I powered through the pain and was able to stick my torso out of the window. Just as I was seeing freedom, I felt a cold hand grab my ankle. I began to scream for help, and to my amazement, I saw a man walking a dog across the street who saw me sticking out of the window. He rushed towards me to help, and I felt the grasp of the hand on my ankle let go. He pulled me out of the window and I collapsed on the lawn in pain. Crying uncontrollably, he grabbed his cell phone, one of those classic flip phones from the early 2000s, and called 911. I laid there completely exhausted and in pain. The man asked me what happened, but I couldn't utter a word. All I could do was cry. When the medics came to get me, they put me on a stretcher and carried me away into the back of an ambulance. I don't remember much after that. I had several cuts across my side that required stitches and staples, but nothing life-threatening. I was finally able to tell my story, the story of Emily Valentine and what happened. When the police came to question me, they informed me that the home was vacant. I couldn't believe it. Emily had disappeared. I told them about the skeletal remains of the cot in the basement, and they informed me that the remains had been taken for DNA testing. I later found out that the remains belonged to a 15-year-old girl from North Dakota that was missing for nearly 20 years. Nothing made sense to me. Had Emily done this? How is that possible? She was only a 16-year-old girl like me. Or was she? The police said that the home had been vacant for many years. When I asked them about Emily, they had no idea who Emily was. When I showed them a picture of her, no one matching that description had been reported missing at all. She was a ghost shadow. Before the police left my side, they did tell me one more detail, a detail that sent shivers down my spine. They had found jars of human tongues in the basement under a crawl space, nearly 20 of them. I never found out who Emily Valentine was or what she was, but I'll never forget that day. I will always have the scars that remind me of what could have been. Like I said, if I had a time machine, I'd go back in time and never step in that house. Once I graduated high school, I moved away for college, met my husband, and here I am, in my 30s, recalling the scariest moment of my life. I've told no one this story other than the police and a select few people, but I wanted to share my story with you. The story of the peculiar Emily Valentine. Valentine's Day is in a few days. I'm afraid of what's to come. Valentine's Day is in a few days, and I'm afraid of what's to come. I need a place to tell my story, to warn others. No one else can do anything, but maybe I can help someone else out there. And well, I want to tell my story before it's maybe too late for me to. When I first started at university, I wasn't sure how I would feel about sharing a dorm room with a roommate. It turns out it was quite a positive experience for me. There are a lot of upsides. One I didn't expect was how it would bring me out of what my parents call my shell. I was able to make friends fast, which is usually difficult for me. Katie, my roommate, has been awesome. She's chill and we get along great. Aside from her need to have a boyfriend over constantly and not warn me until I get back to the dorm, I've enjoyed my time here. Katie and her messy, hastily written notes telling me when I can come back to the dorm were the only real issue. So when I saw one taped to the door a couple of weeks ago, I felt nothing but annoyance and pure exhaustion. It was late. I had a long day of classes and then a long study session at the library after. All I wanted to do was collapse into my bed. I mean, really, it's 2022. She could at least text me. Why does she take the time to write a note and tape it to the door instead of firing off a quick message? At least I know before I get all the way back home and can figure something else out for however long I need to. This note was different though. When I picked it up, it was heavier than usual. I opened it to find an actual letter, something neat and thought out that had a small bag wrapped in lovely heart covered wrapping. I thought it must have been for Katie, an early Valentine from her boyfriend or something. It felt intimate, like I shouldn't be holding it, and I wanted to put it back down. And I went to, but that's when I noticed my name at the top. It was addressed to me. This letter was for me, and certainly not from Katie, like I was expecting. Haley, I've been a little too shy to tell you how I feel, so I'm writing to you instead. Maybe one day soon I can do this in person, but for now I just wanted you to know that I think you are amazing. I had never gotten anything like it before. Sure, I'd had a boyfriend in high school, but that was short-lived and clumsy. Never anything like this. This was a total shock. I've gone on a few dates since I started school, but nothing more than that. And those people wouldn't be too shy to tell me anything. I had no clue who this letter could have possibly come from. There was no clue in the writing or on the letter. Nothing to tip me off on who my admirer was. It was simply signed with a heart. When I walked through the door, Katie was already waggling her eyebrows at me. She teased me with a practically purred greeting. "Hey, lover girl." Apparently, Katie had seen the letter when she got home from dinner, but she said it hadn't been there before that when she came back after lunch. She had looked at it and asked me what was in the bag. I hadn't even thought to open it, confusion and excitement still clouding my mind. I took the opportunity to open the bag and turn it over so whatever was inside would fall out into my hand. Cinnamon hearts. The spicy cinnamon smell wafted to my nose the second I opened the bag. Katie teased me a bit more that night, wondering if I'd been sent some jewellery next, wondering who my secret Valentine could be. We were both stumped. The next morning, Katie and I went to the local coffee shop like I do every morning. It had been my ritual since I started at school. I always grab a tea and a bagel. It's where we met Ted. He goes to the community college close by and works at the coffee shop. We've become friends with him of sorts. He even came over to help set up and move some stuff that didn't get shipped to me from my parents in time for the start of school. So we had to try to do it ourselves. He volunteered to help and we see him every day. This day though, I was on the lookout, my mind wrapped in the possibility of who could have sent me that letter and candy. I went to order and Ted told me my usual was already coming up. When I tried to pay him, he said it was on him. He gave me a shy smile. I asked if he was sure and he said absolutely that it was on him. On the way out, I asked Katie if she thought the letter could be from Ted. She asked how I could even doubt it after the exchange we had just had. I suppose she was right, and Ted was cute. I wasn't sure I wanted to come out and ask anyone about it though. The person who sent the letter was clearly shy. I didn't want to guess and get it wrong, make anything uncomfortable with anyone. Aside from telling Wendy, the girl I sit beside and talk to in my film class, I just ignored the letter. I figured if the person wanted to be known, they would make themselves known. I had almost given up hope when I found another letter left at the cubicle I always study at in the library. This one caught me off guard. Whoever put it there knows I study in that very spot almost every day. Was it there all day and they just hoped I'd show up and that someone else wouldn't get it? That doesn't seem quite right. I felt uneasy then. I wanted to know who was sending these letters. This one read, "Haley, will you be my Valentine?" Signed with another heart. Another bag taped to the bottom filled with more cinnamon hearts. I showed the letter to Katie. She just said it was sweet. She told me to just confront Ted the next day when I was going to see him. I told her I wasn't sure, that it didn't feel quite right to just ask someone. She brushed me off. The next day, when I didn't ask Ted, Katie jumped between us and asked herself, "Hey Ted, have you been the one sending the gorgeous Haley here love letters, and if so, would you like to go out with her?" I was mortified by Katie. "Love letters?" Ted questioned her, looking between Katie and I. "Yeah, asking to be her Valentine and stuff. You want to be Haley's Valentine?" Katie wouldn't give it up. Ted looked at me and nodded, an empathetic yes coming from him. I was shocked. I told Ted I'd text him later. I wanted to get out of there. out of such a public area. It all felt wrong, but I was excited at the same time. Ted ended up texting me first that day. He asked if I'd like to go out that night. I agreed. I figured, why not? He was taking the time to make his feelings known, and he's nice and cute. I took the time to run to the store before I got ready, grabbing some cinnamon hearts to give him. It felt like a fitting present for the occasion. The date went well. I had fun. We were happy and planned to see each other again. Ted was sweet, and he confessed that he's liked me for a while, but didn't know how to tell me. When I gave him the cinnamon hearts, he thanked me, but said he hates them. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it. After that, I started finding little heart bags filled with cinnamon hearts in random places. One time I even found one on my pillow. I was impressed with the effort Ted was going through. We did go out a few more times. We were really hitting it off. Everyone was happy to see me hanging out with a guy, and I was having fun too. One night we even ran into Wendy and a bunch of my film class friends at a movie opening. We all sat together and talked about movies. Ted kept up, and while some of it was over his head, he still seemed like he was enjoying himself. So when I got another letter, I was surprised. Roses are red, violets are blue. Why don't you really see me when I'm talking to you? I found this one in my bag, the one I carry around with me at school. It was possible Ted tucked it in when I saw him the night before, but that doesn't make sense. Why would he do that? I've given him lots of attention, and this note has a whole different tone to it. I happened to find the letter while I was in film class. I opened it and read it, thinking it was some cute love note from Ted. I must have looked concerned. I felt it too. It was an odd note, scary even. Wendy leaned over to ask me if I was alright, so I told her about the notes and Ted. She ordered this one. She was surprised to find out I was dating Ted. She agreed it was scary and maybe I shouldn't see him anymore. She seemed worried and a little angry for me, and that made me worried and angry. What was going on? I had to ask him what was up with it. I went straight to the coffee shop after my next class to confront him. I knew he was working. When I got there, he wasn't there. His boss said he left an hour before, that he wasn't feeling well. I texted him telling him I needed to talk to him. I went home to wait. I didn't get a response. I figured at first he was probably sleeping because he wasn't feeling well. Maybe he just felt bad about the note and didn't know how to talk to me about it. I gave him the night. Tried to text a couple more times, but nothing. That morning, I went to the coffee shop as usual, expecting to find him, but he wasn't there. The owner was again. I asked him where Ted was, and he said he didn't know, that he hadn't shown up today, and that he was probably still sick. Why wouldn't anyone contact me? I felt so bad though at the same time. What could be so wrong with him all of a sudden? I didn't want to be narcissistic, but the timing was weird. It didn't feel right to me. Why right after he sent that note? He was fine the night before, and he had worked all day. It doesn't make sense why he wouldn't talk to me. I sent him another text telling him I wasn't mad about the note, but that I'd like to talk to him. I waited some more. Still no response. I was worried now. This wasn't like Ted. Usually he'd respond pretty quick. His phone always close by, like most people our age. I waited and awoke the next morning to a single cinnamon heart on my pillow. I know I didn't put it there, and Katie hadn't come home that night. Could it have been Ted? But that would mean he was in my room. I tried and called him again. Went to the coffee shop. He still wasn't there. No one else seemed concerned. I went to his place and buzzed up. Again, no one answered. I waited until someone left his building so I could go myself. The place was quiet, eerily quiet, with no sounds coming from anywhere. I banged on his door. Still no answer. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I called the police and I told them I was afraid that something happened to Ted. When they arrived at the building, I told them about the notes, how we started dating. I showed them to them, even that last one that was left for me. I told them about how I was afraid because Ted hadn't been to work and no one has been able to get a hold of him. That he won't answer his phone, text or door. The police didn't seem too interested. They said he was probably avoiding me because of the notes, but that they would check it out and make sure he was alright. They tried to knock themselves. They tried to call him. Nothing. They got in touch with his boss and to confirm he hadn't called into work, and then contacted his parents to confirm they hadn't spoken to him. With that, they were able to get the building manager to let them in to check his place. The officer told me to stay back. I couldn't though. Once he walked in, I followed. I needed to know what was going on. Everything in me told me something wasn't right here. Aside from the officer's footsteps, the place was silent. So very quiet. When the officer gasped from the bedroom, it made every hair on my body prickle and stand at attention. I ran over. The officer yelled for me to stay back. I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. There was Ted, very clearly not okay, hanging in his room. I went to the station to be questioned after that. They showed me the note that was left on his bed. I'm sorry, with a single cinnamon heart. The picture of that letter of that heart, it broke me. They ruled it a suicide. I couldn't understand it. Why would he do that? I know now it wasn't one though. I got another letter today. I went to class hoping to keep my mind off of everything. I can't afford to fall behind. I sat alone. Wendy wasn't there. It was a bit of a relief because I didn't feel like talking to anyone. At the end of class, another friend we hang out with sometimes walked up to me and told me Wendy had left something for them to give to me. That she was sorry she couldn't be here to give it to me herself. They told me she had a suddenly drop out of school. Some sort of family emergency. No one will get in the way of us, Valentine. When I brought the note to the police, they looked into Wendy, but all they could say was that no one named Wendy went to my school and hadn't in a few years. That whoever I sat beside in class must not have been using her real name. That or she wasn't actually enrolled. They haven't been able to track her down. New notification from Instant Valentine. My teachers used to force us to exchange love notes. We were given lists of everyone in the class and made to spend money on themed boxes of cards with uncomfortably personal sayings. Be mine, someone like you, You're so pretty. I love you so much. The idea was to be anonymous in our delivery. But when 25 kids are all stumbling over each other in a room meant to handle 15, it's not exactly a discreet process. Some kids went home with lollipops expertly fashioned to the cards. A few enthusiastic parents made goodie bags with Pez dispensers and coloured paper, sacrifices to the elite of our class. One kid, always one kid, never got anything. Despite the lists and the rules against discrimination and the fact that she was always nice to everyone, there was always one desk left horribly, obviously bare. I always told myself I didn't mind, but that was elementary school, when the ultimate display of affection was pushing each other on the swings, and at some point down the line people discovered how to order bouquets of roses and perfected the art of making out in full view of everyone except the teachers. I guess cars are sort of obsolete, but people get other things. Mostly fluffy, button-eyed things with bows like nooses around their necks. The fact that those things never used to make it to me is my own fault. I know that. I know I should be more outgoing, or prettier, or just better. But it's more comforting to blame everyone else instead. That's the kind of mood I was in. Early last week, when I was sitting on my polka dot bed, scrolling through frilly websites complete with gifs of dogs chewing heart-shaped treats. Not because I was bitter or anything, just that Valentine's Day was coming up, and I had to do a love letter for creative writing. Fishing for inspiration even if resentment was the only fish biting. I clicked a random link and a brightly coloured interface popped up. It was a flat red with a few sparse graphics, a title and a button beaming, "Sign up today." A character was paused on the bottom of the screen, looking up at the button. It was impossible to tell if it was a baby or a child. Its head was swollen out and up, with a minuscule torso and 4 fat limbs. Tufts of blonde hair swooped over huge blue eyes, and everything about it, from its blue clothes to its red skin, was grossly oversaturated. The title was Instant Valentine. Curious, I hovered over the sign up button, not really sure what I was expecting. Part of me thought it was going to be a joke. That text would flash, calling me a loser, and somehow add me to a public spreadsheet of how many others had clicked the link. I clicked it anyway, but instead a phone popped up, asking for an email and name. Bad as this is going to sound, I never really cared about giving away my email to sites like this. I did it often enough at malls to get Wi-Fi, and with those sketchy grade saver websites, I figured as long as I never put my real name, I wasn't really giving anything up. Now I know better. I typed in my email and an alias I spent 30 seconds choosing. Gwen. It's the name I used to wish I had, from when Ben 10 was my favorite show in the world. A minute later, I got a notification and checked my email, again expecting an advert or punchline. I've transcribed it here. To Gwen, you liked my life. Be mine. There was no sender. The email was just the site name and string of numbers. I opened the attachment and found a drawing of a little girl holding a candle. It looked like the first mascot, too red and lumpy, like those vintage cherub kids. Some kind of gushy mailing list. Cool. I closed the email and went on to bed a while later, secretly excited by the digital admirer. This was last week. The next morning, I checked my email again, and there was another note from Instant Valentine. Gwen, you look so sweet enough to eat. Be my Valentine. Attached was another old-timey drawing of a girl sitting in a comically large cauldron, an open fire beneath. I know it's dumb, but something about the notes was reassuring. There was something to look forward to, for one, but there were also windows into another world, Gwen's world. The notes kept coming. All of them came with drawings, increasingly saturated. A pirate shoving a gooey hook through a girl's heart. Let's hook up, girl. Be mine. A Betty Boop type with a rubber nose, horse legs, and a melting pile around her. Bright flames eating away her skin. You're hot stuff, Valentine. Be mine. A little devil holding a pitchfork with hearts at the tips. All his expression was twisted with pain, and the horns and tail looked surgically attached. I love you from hell and back. Be mine. At first the art was charming in a weird way. Stuff you'd find in a garage sale or an attic. But as the weeks progressed, they only got more graphic. I tried to Google the pictures by description, hoping to find the artist, and came up empty. I Googled Instant Valentine. Nothing relevant. I couldn't even find the original site anymore. And I didn't remember the random series of clicks that got me there in the first place. But I wasn't too worried, more curious than anything. I didn't even realize how much I enjoyed the daily acknowledgement until some girls from class asked if I even had a boyfriend yet. As I walked away from them, I wondered why I'd said yes. The days passed. I started finding out Gwen's world a bit. I imagined her as a perfect version of me, taller, smoother skin, a smile like Gatsby and a voice like Daisy. Gwen was confident, and everyone wanted to be her Valentine. I even created a persona for the note giver. I called him Josh, and he grew inside my head as a shy, artsy kid who had been in love with Gwen since they were kids. Love you, dear. Be mine. Gwen's friends recoiled from the bloated carcass of a girl, wearing a sexy deer costume, painted across the page, but she knew it was special. I gained another reason to hate Valentine's Day. I knew the notes would probably stop then, but sometime in the last few days, the notes started to change. They stopped being addressed to Gwen and started being addressed to me. I spent an hour trying to find out how it knew my name. My lame conclusion was that it could read other emails in my inbox, although I'm still not sure. The thought chilled me, but there wasn't a way to cancel the subscription. I couldn't even reply to the email, so I did nothing, waiting for the issue to resolve itself. The cheesy pickup lines thinned out, replacing them with constant emails, several per day, with just 2 words. Be mine? Be mine! Be mine! The drawings were still there. They were wrong somehow, like the ink was running. Smudged and blackened faces screamed at me from my computer screen. All these different girls. One was wearing a bikini or underwear, and her head was submerged in a bathtub. Another chubbier girl had on a pink costume and was roasting over a spit with an apple between her lips. Those things had been okay in Gwen's world, but now they were real. Threatening. I need you to know that I wanted to show someone. Friends or parents even. I need you to know that I tried. But I couldn't bring myself to. The embarrassment would have crushed me. and I think maybe there was still a tiny part, a sick and shriveled thing just under my skin, living in my fingertips and between my hips that wanted to keep it a secret. Wanted to have something all my own. And maybe that part of me was glad to see my name grace the screen, because just as quickly as I'd created Gwen, I started to resent her. I need you to know this because I deserve it. There's always a new girl in the drawings. They're getting worse. I can hear their screams. Today is Valentine's Day, and I'm sitting alone in the cafeteria, surrounded by red things, fluffy, lacy things. Everyone has a rose. The office is giving them away so no one will feel left out. I didn't pick one up. I had to write this down. I just checked my email again. Happy Valentine's Day. Let's tie the knot. The picture is in that same ridiculous style, but the ink looks fresh and the lines are sharp. The girl has ugly brown hair pulled into pigtails, and she's sitting on a polka dot bedspread. Heavy ropes crisscross her body. There's tape over her mouth, but she doesn't look afraid. My mum just called me, saying I need to come home. She said she was picking me up. I can see her car through the windows. The person inside is not my mother. An office aide is walking around the cafeteria with a green slip looking for me. To send me away, only a matter of time now. The bed in the drawing looks like my bed. The girl in the drawing is wearing my clothes. I wish I was afraid. The office aide is making eye contact, walking towards me. The car outside is honking. A girl is crying over spilling her chocolates. There are roses in the garage bin. Mascara is running, but I'm not. I should be afraid. Happy Valentine's Day. Do not open until Valentine's Day. Reddit, I need your help. Every year around February, I get like this. My appetite is absent. My thoughts become cluttered. I have to take a week off from work just to cope with the anxiety. Every year, a day or two before Valentine's Day, I get mailed an envelope from my daughter. They are always titled the same. Do not open until Valentine's Day, and contain a piece of ripped paper with an image printed on them. I always wait until Valentine's Day to open them, and that day is approaching fast. This year will be the 14th year in a row she has mailed one. The only problem is my daughter disappeared 14 years ago. It all started when my daughter Riley was 8. Her mother and I just divorced, and it was nasty. We hated each other. I'll admit I can be stubborn sometimes, but according to her, every bad thing that happened was my fault. Her finger was always pointed at me. There were so many nights Riley couldn't sleep because of my yelling. Looking back, the divorce was in our best interest, especially Riley's, but still. I can't imagine how difficult it was for Riley, watching her mother and I drift apart. My lawyer was expensive, but worth it when joint custody was granted. My marriage was terrible, but it brought the flower of the world into my life, Riley. Arrangements were made for each of us to keep Riley 2 weeks at a time, and both of us living in the same school district made transport easy. Having to deal with a crazy mother on occasion was a pain in the butt, but well worth it to see my girl. As she grew up, Her curiosity astonished me and opened my eyes to things you miss as an adult. She loved trips to the zoo, pushing her doll in a stroller and swinging. I taught her how to ride a bike with no training wheels, and she taught me how to appreciate endless hours of Disney movies. My favorite times with Riley were holidays. My side of the family treated her like a princess, and she soaked up the attention like a sponge. We always had so much fun playing games or exploring outside. She loved spending holidays with me, but usually didn't get to. Her overbearing mother caused a stir if Riley wasn't with her side of the family for holidays, and I usually didn't put up a fight. I knew to pick my battles carefully. Since she couldn't see me on most major holidays, she started mailing me things. She was sad I couldn't see her on Thanksgiving or Christmas, so she would cut out funny images she saw in a newspaper magazine or the internet and mail them to me a few days before the holiday. She always titled the envelopes with "Do not open until insert holiday." She started enjoying her little college projects, and I started receiving them on New Year, Halloween, 4th of July, and Valentine's Day. The next time she would come over, she asked if I waited until the actual holiday to open them, which I always did. It was a fun way for us to get around the 2-week rule. I started putting all of our envelopes and cutouts into a bin. I've held on to each and every one. She was my little angel that could instantly put me in a good mood. Her body may have been small, but her heart was large enough for the two of us. I don't know how she turned out so caring after all the shiz her mother and I put her through. But God, I cared for her so much. One morning I was woken by an authoritative knock at my door. The police eagerly searched my home and questioned me for hours, but I was more confused than helpful. I lost my shiz when they said Riley was missing. I sucked up my pride to join my ex-wife in helping the police any way we could. The search began immediately. The Amber Alert had already been issued, and the whole community searched for my little angel. She has never been found. After getting my ex-wife's neighbors and others' testimony, the police pieced together their best assumption as to what happened. The report said Riley waited at the end of the driveway for the school bus. Her mother let Riley stand by herself while getting ready for work. The next time she looked for Riley, she was gone, and suspected the bus had picked her up and she was on the way to school. The bus driver said she never saw Riley that day. When the school called my ex-wife about Riley's absence an hour later, the police were called. Over the next few days, tips came in, but nothing substantive. As the attention faded, so did the help. As the help faded, so did my optimism. When the police called off the search 2 weeks later, I smashed the F out of my bedroom drywall in a rage. I had a phase where I blamed my ex-wife for being irresponsible. I had a binge drinking phase. Hell, I even had a suicidal phase that went so far as a pistol purchase. The light of my life had been extinguished by some random perv or effing maniac abductor. Nothing helped ease the pain, and that following year crept by slowly. Then, I received an envelope. Startled by the writing, I dropped it on the ground when I read the front. Do not open until Valentine's Day. The handwriting was shockingly familiar, and even the apostrophe was missing. Something she always forgot. I lost it. Tears streamed down my face while I sobbed harder than I had in my life. My sorrow quickly turned to anger when I realized what happened. Someone was playing the sickest joke imaginable, and I had to find out who. I called my ex-wife, but she brushed off my anger as pathetic. I called a few friends who might have known something, but no one did. When I finally opened the envelope, the only thing it contained was a small torn piece of paper with a printed image of a monkey. After calming my rage and getting my wits about me, I threw everything into a plastic bag to take to the police. Did one of her letters get trapped in the mail only to be sent a year later? Is it a cruel joke? Is her abductor taunting me? Is Riley alive? None of my questions were answered after they analyzed the mail. No fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA, nothing. The only helpful information I received was since there was no stamp or return address, that someone put it in the mailbox personally. After 6 months of testing the envelope and monkey image was returned to me, I put it in the box with the rest of Riley's gifts. The event was so peculiar it never left my mind. I spent hours going over possible scenarios of her disappearance and how one of her gifts got to me a year late. I spent that year at recalls from my family and friends while trying to make sense of what happened. My heart needed to heal alone. On February the 12th, the following year, another envelope came. It had the same handwriting and title, "Do not open until Valentine's Day." I didn't get upset. Somehow it gave me peace. I followed the instruction and 2 days later opened it. A small piece of paper with an orange on it was inside. I put it in with the others. This has continued for the last 13 years. 14 if one comes this year. The first 4 envelopes carried images of a monkey, an orange, a mailbox, a mouse. After 4 unsuccessful attempts, in 4 years the police could not find any information. Every year I brought them my newest gift, and every year they told me no evidence was found. They knew it was odd for me to get letters the same time every year, but since they were not threatening, they couldn't do much else. They advised I ignore them since it could be a prank. After the 4th year, I stopped showing them. The next year, I was mailed images of a yo-yo, a kite, an igloo. A few months after I received the cutout of the igloo, I was called about Riley's disappearance. A young college filmmaker wanted to do a low-budget documentary on her disappearance and asked permission from me. Publicity could only help Riley's situation, so I agreed. The interview was difficult, but the college kid was accommodating enough to interview my ex-wife on a different occasion. I never mentioned the envelopes. After it was released online, the cops got a few more tips, but nothing materialized. The next February, I set up a camera to record my mailbox. I wanted to catch the person in the act. However, after getting another envelope, I searched the footage to find an error had occurred. The last 12 hours were just static. This new envelope gave me a rush while opening it. It was like Riley was still talking to me. Sure, I had doubts, but sometimes the only thing keeping a man sane are his delusions. The handwriting was still the same, and it was still Riley's. The envelope's image was of a lemur. I continued living my life. I've had a construction job for 9 years now that pays well and keeps the hours consistent. My girlfriend lives with me and she is great, but I have kept the gifts from Riley a secret. Even my ex-wife doesn't know about them. When asked why I take off around Valentine's Day, I just tell everyone it's in honor of my daughter. The next 2 years brought in large images. The thick folded pieces were glossy, like from a nice magazine. They were a light bulb and an elephant. I continued saving all the gifts. Every year was like a present from Riley. My assumption of a prank faded years ago, knowing no one would keep this up that long. The next 3 years brought envelopes containing a dog, a mop, an ear or earring. Here's the envelope and ear or earring cut out from last year. The last 13 years have been a hard battle to fight. Not knowing where Riley is or if she is even still alive eats at my soul. I managed the pain as best I could, but these damn envelopes bring it all back. I have no idea why anyone would do this as a prank, but I equally can't believe it's anyone other than Riley. Every year my mailbox camera malfunctions, goes blank, or is consumed with static the day I receive the envelopes. I have no proof that someone is messing with me, and it drives me crazy. Would anyone really torment me this long? Riley would be 22 now, and I'm sure just as sweet as when she was taken from me. Valentine's Day is approaching, and the anxiety has been reaching out for guidance. I can't make sense of the situation, so I'm asking for any help or solutions to this strange puzzle. Come to my cabin in the woods. When I was about 7, I went on a camping trip with my Girl Scout troop. We were up in the mountains, and right next to our cabin was a densely wooded area that went on for a while before leading down to another road that had other cabins lining it. Another girl and I decided to go exploring in the woods. We were out there for maybe 10 minutes when this big dog ran towards us and scared the crap out of us. We were about to run away when a young guy in his 20s came up and explained that it was his dog. After he assured us we were safe from his dog, he began to ask us our names and where we were staying. After talking to us for a while, he mentioned that he had a cabin a few roads down. At 7, I was fairly innocent, and it didn't occur to me that it was inappropriate for this man to be speaking with us. But when he suggested that we come with him to his cabin, I knew something wasn't right. I told him that we had to go before we got in trouble. But before I left, he suggested that we come meet him later that night if we wanted to see his cabin. I don't know for certain that he had sinister intentions, but as a grown woman, I'd be terrified if this happened to my child. The worst part is that he looked so normal. Just some young guy walking his dog. Staying in the cabin. Now, this story did not happen to me, but one of my friends who I worked with last summer. at the camp that this took place at, and I think it would fit here pretty well. Sometime around 2000 or earlier, my friend had gone camping with his family. He's about 5 at this time. They had gone to this summer camp that his family had been involved with for years, and were allowed to use one of their cabins for the weekend because they were on good terms with the full-time staff. Now, the camp is divided into a few clusters of cabins, all of which were pretty old and creepy and built in the early 1930s. They'd been well maintained, were never refurbished, and with just mesh windows and creaky big wooden doors, they could give anyone the creeps, especially with the winter wind blowing. My friend's family was staying in one of the cabins close to the building where the camp director worked and slept. On the second day, as it was getting dark, my friend and his older brother, who was a regular counselor there for the past few years, went for a walk which led them down a winding dirt road to another cluster of cabins. They could both tell there was something wrong, but they couldn't place it. My friend several years later told me that it felt like everything looked completely ordinary, but it was like there was just something that completely threw the vibe off. His brother would attribute it to what he noticed next. The furthest cabin from the entrance had all of the windows closed. There were large wooden panels that had to be lifted up and put in the mesh windows. Then he heard a loud thud, and then the lights in the cabin were on. Now, it wasn't uncommon for other cabins to be rented out by hunters in the winter, so he left it alone even though he still had a strange vibe, and decided not to investigate further. The next morning, during breakfast, he was speaking to the camp director and casually asked him how many other cabins he was planning on renting that hunting season, and mentioned that he had noticed that another cabin was being used back towards the far side of the camp. The director had a stunned look on his face, and then told him to call the police and that they weren't renting out any of the other cabins that weekend. The police showed up, and after a 2-hour standoff in the middle of the woods ended with a man in custody. For the past 3 weeks, there had been a dangerous man hiding out in a summer camp. My friend didn't know it at the time, but was later told by his brother that when they took him out, he was starving and unshaved. He had a rifle, a pistol and a shotgun, and 2 duffel bags full of valuables that had been taken during violent break-ins over the past months in the surrounding counties. Yeah, desperate, violent robber hiding out in a cabin in the woods. Let's never meet. Cabin in the woods. Hi, so while I've been reading these stories for a while, I have very little experience posting. Hopefully this is in the right place. A couple years ago, my friend Kate had asked me to go with her to a party. This party was being thrown by her friend Susan. Kate had gone to Catholic school with her in elementary and middle school, but during high school, Kate ended up going to public school, where she met me, while Susan went to a Catholic high school. The two had grown somewhat apart and hung out with different people, which is why Kate invited me along. It was Susan's birthday, and apparently Susan's parents had decided to rent out a cabin for her. They did this for her the previous year, and unbeknownst to them, she had decided to throw a party. The party had been a hit, so she was planning on doing it again. Kate and I drove to the cabin together. The cabin was pretty isolated. Aside from the woods behind it, there wasn't anything around. We couldn't see other cabins, but I imagine they would probably be empty because it was winter time. I was a little apprehensive because I wasn't going to know anyone at the party, but I figured after a few drinks that wouldn't really bother me anymore. Also, if you watch scary movies, you know that having a party in a cabin in the woods is a horror movie cliche. I was very aware of that. Kate and I had even been joking about how attending this party sounded like a prelude to a horror film. As if that wasn't enough, this was a Catholic school girl party. We arrive at the cabin, and it is pitch black outside. We needed to use our phones just to find our way. We go inside. Everything seems fine. Birthday girl is having a fun time. There's a good amount of people. The odd thing is that there seems to be a strange sort of divide at this party. Kate and I were completely unaware of what was happening. I did happen to notice this classic guy who had the name of the city we lived in tattooed in a messy scroll across his neck. Kate and I had been silently laughing about it. We were also a little worried because we wondered if that meant he was in a gang or something. Anyways, I don't remember why, but the main group of the party wanted these people to leave. I think it had to do with them drinking a lot despite not having brought any alcohol of their own. So in order to get these people to go, the main group said that a ranger or whoever was coming to stop by, and there were only supposed to be like 2 cars by the cabin and a handful of people. Rumor was that one of the guys in the group was on probation and couldn't afford to get in trouble. They left. The plan was a success. Also, we thought. Just as the group leaves, there were about 4 or 5 guys and 1 girl. The girl comes back in and says, "I just want to tell the birthday girl happy birthday," in a really loud voice, drawing everyone's attention. Everyone was staring at her in confusion. Why was she announcing this? When not even 2 seconds later, we hear a window in one of the back rooms being busted open. This continues on, and more windows are broken. People are shouting and screaming. I'm just sitting there in confusion. Kate and I had been at this party for all of 15 minutes before all hell broke loose, and the girl who had invited the group of hoodlums is now saying that she knows at least one of them has a gun. Great. I don't know if my mind wasn't processing all of this correctly or what, but I'm sitting there thinking, well, this is happening. The majority of us remained in the cabin. A couple of people went outside to see if the group was still there, and after a little bit of time had passed, people began to leave. There was still some fear that those guys might be out there waiting, but a lot of people just wanted to get the F out. I remember 3 girls who had been planning on staying the night had gathered all their stuff up their arms were full and began heading out the door. As soon as all 3 walk out, we hear screaming coming from the woods, and all 3 girls immediately turn around and walk back in. In retrospect, it was kind of funny. One of the girls proceeds to start crying. Luckily, the scream had only been that of a new girl arriving at the party. She had seen her friend outside and had screamed in excitement. Kate and I had stayed at the cabin for a couple of hours. We really didn't want to leave Susan alone, and the majority of people had left at this point. Aside from us, there were only a couple of other people left in the cabin. Thankfully, those people were staying the night, so Kate and I were able to leave around 2 a.m. We had all debated calling the cops, but considering the underage drinking going on, no one really wanted to. Plus, Susan was worried about her parents finding out about the party, and had decided she was just going to lie about how the windows had been broken. Thankfully, the group of people, potential gangsters, did not return. While that night had been scary, all I can really focus on was the fact that this took place at a cabin in the middle of the woods at a party thrown by Catholic school girls. Of course, that would be the one and only party I've been to have scary shiz like this happen. Beware cliches. My uncle's demon possession. My dad told me this story about when we lived in Mexico when I was little to keep me from trying stupid shiz like Ouija boards and cursed objects, stuff like that. When my uncle was about 15, he had been walking on a trail leading to a forest when along the way he saw a middle-aged lady who told him to stop walking the way he was going. My uncle, being young and kinda stupid, had ignored this and continued to walk the path he was on. As he continued, he began feeling like something was watching him or following him and began seeing weird stuff at the corner of his eyes. I guess that's when my uncle decided to head back because he started to get a little spooked. Right halfway, my uncle had been acting out of the ordinary. He was more aggressive and angrier, which was strange because he was a relatively calm dude. To the point where he started to flat out threaten everybody in the house, which consisted of "I'm gonna kill all of you" or "you're all gonna die" in a voice that knew was not my uncle's. Eventually, he started to get physical, throwing chairs, attacking his brothers, including my dad, and overall being a nutcase. My grandma right away called the priest, believing he was possessed. While the priest was performing an exorcism, whatever was in my uncle had started to struggle, spit, make threatening gestures, you name it. Whatever was possessing my uncle turned to my dad and said, "One day I'm coming back to kill you." Yikes. My true scary childhood stories. All of my life I've had a ghost or a spirit or a demon, whatever you wanna call it, but have lived in a lot of different houses in my whole 16 years of life. My first house was a pretty small house, and my father had told me that he would see a woman walking outside of the house and he would hear me, an infant, coo and giggle at things through the baby monitor, and he would go into the room to see if one of my sisters were awake and playing with me, and he said they were always sound asleep. My second house was about a quarter of a mile from my first house, and it's right next to the house I'm living in right now. I was a couple months old when I first moved in. I was about 1, and there is 2 windows on both sides of the front door. I was staring at something out one of the windows, and my mother comes over and asks what I'm staring at. And I turned to her, looked her dead in the eye, and I said, "I'm looking at the man in the front yard." My mother looked out the window and said, "What man? I don't see a man." And I said, "Don't you see him? He looks like a spider." And my mother was a very superstitious woman, so she just about had a heart attack. Fast forward to when I was about 3, and me and my mum were talking about my day, and I said something like, "Have you met my other mummy?" And my mother froze and got super freaked out. When I was about 5, I remember it was Christmas Eve, and I was sleeping in my sister's room, and she asked me to go get her a glass of water. So I start heading to the kitchen, and you have to pass the living room to get to the kitchen. And I glanced at the living room and saw 2 little girls. And as I saw them, they looked at me, and my sister comes out of the room and says, "Not in the kitchen, in the bathroom." As I looked back to look at the girls, they were gone. This story was told by my sister when she was in high school. She was walking down the hallway. She passed by my room. She saw a little girl digging through my toy box. At first, my sister thought it was me, so she kept walking, but she took a couple of steps. Then she realized I wasn't at home, and so she walked back to my room, and the room was empty. I moved to the house after my mother died when I was about 7. By this time, both my older sisters had moved out, and my mother had passed away, so it was just me, my little brother, and my father. My brother and I had never liked going into the master bedroom. We found it creepy. A couple years later, I was a sophomore, and I had been battling severe depression from my father being abusive and my mother dying when I was younger. Plus, I got diagnosed with bipolar, anxiety and eating disorders, and a bunch of other things. I moved into the master bedroom that I thought was creepy when I was younger, but I found myself becoming obsessed with the room. I would isolate myself in the room and self-harm almost every week since I lived in that house. I would try to kill myself 4 times. I would get angry when someone would come in without my permission, and it got to the point where there was one day where my brother went into my room. I got so angry I blacked out and woke up with my best friend holding me down and my brother with a black eye and a busted lip. I felt horrible. I hated myself. I still haven't forgiven myself for it. I would see dark figures in my room at night. My boyfriend said he'd seen a dark black figure walk into my room and close the door. And there was a time I was home alone. I can't even describe the emotion I felt. It was feeling like I was going insane. I kept seeing things pass by the room. I was in something in my head kept telling me to kill myself. But since I've moved out of the house, I have not experienced any urges to self-harm or harm others. So I'll end it here. If you all like it, I'll tell you more of my stories. Comment down below what you thought of my stories and what are some of your stories. Why did I agree to this dare? I can't believe my friends made me do this, I say as I walk through the crypt. A sound flows through the corridors, a sound of chanting. It's just my imagination. Calm down, man, I say to myself. I walk through and step on something hard and sharp. The hell, a human skull? No, it just fell off a shelf, but it looks fresh. I examine and continue until I get to the corridor. I can see a faint glow through one of the corridors. Maybe there's a tour going on, I think out loud. There it is, the chanting again, except it's louder. I find the light source, and as I thought, it was a tour group of young adults. It's dangerous to be out here, I think. I go to talk to them, but I hit my head and I'm instantly unconscious. As soon as I wake up, I look for light and see a torch. I shine it and is that blood? Holy shiz. I think I'm gonna throw up. Their organs are strewn across the cold damp floor. Looks of fear and betrayal in their eyes. Some of them don't even have eyes. Some of them are missing limbs or have only bone. I can't believe this is happening. I run as far as I can. I soon realize I'm running further into the crypt. I turn around to run out, but I can't remember which way I came in. I have to find a way out. The chanting. The chanting is back. I don't understand how, but it's even louder. I follow it, but it stays the same volume, like it's right next to me. I start running towards it and come into a dark room with drawings made of blood on the wall and candles in a neat circle. Something in the middle is making the chanting. I turn my torch on and hold here. My friends, they're in a kneeling position, chanting. But they can't be. Their jaws are broken, swing from the moment of their heads like swings attached with tendons. Their eyes have been gouged out and their hands have almost been snapped off. But they're still chanting in a single voice. One of them is still alive. I run to them and ask them who did this. They scream, "Stay the F away from me," and start running. I don't understand. The chanting, louder again, like my whole head is wrapped in the sound of the horrifying demonic chanting. I can't take it. I rip off their jaws and start pounding on their heads with a rock. I just want it to stop. Make it stop! Make it stop! Make it stop! I run as soon as I can see what I did to their corpse. I see a light, I run, but the light seems to only get further away. I see something, no, three things, three red figures standing in the light. I rush towards them. They did this. It's their fault. I hit the first one square in the face with a rock. It seems to be confused and scared. I don't care. I hit it over and over and over. It stops moving. I made a demon stop moving, and it felt good. I proceed to break his legs of the other two, then drop the rock on one of their heads and break the other's leg. The second one survived the rock and now it's getting up. I jump on it and press my thumbs in its eyes until I hear a pop. I then crush its head. I run through the light and don't stop running until I'm home. I go to wash myself and I see in the mirror. No. I can't be. I can't be one of them. I have to die. I grab a gun and 9 people were found dead in the crib. 6 were in a tour group and the other 3 were friends of the killer. The tour group seemed like they were killed with bare hands. The killer then dragged 3 corpses to a satanic worshipping group hidden deep in the heart of the crypt. The friends of the killer were found near the exit of the crypt, all mutilated in horrifying ways. The killer was found dead in his bathroom from a gunshot to the head. The police are investigating why. I send my apologies to the families involved in this. The night alone. I have 2 brothers that live with me along with my single mom. So usually I have company. But on this night, I was lucky to be by myself. My mom was somewhere with friends, I assume. My older brother was out drinking, and my younger brother was with a friend spending the night. I have been watching The Twilight Zone most of the night, along with scary YouTube videos. Usually they don't bother me, and this time was no different until I went into the kitchen. Something was watching me. I could feel it. I shook it off as paranoid thoughts. I opened the fridge and saw that there was a lot of beer and other alcoholic beverages left. I'm not much of a drinker, but my boredom got the best of me and I started drinking them. I was watching the YouTube videos again, this time about ghosts, when that feeling hit me again. I had drank enough to do away with my motor skills, so I got up and stumbled or looked around and asked whatever it was to show itself. nothing happened. So I shook it off again and went back to the videos, syncing my phone to the TV so I could get close and drown everything out with noise. I then started to hear a girl screaming. I assumed it was a part of the video as I turned the TV down, but the screaming was still just as loud as it was hurting my head. I covered my ears and went to go outside, stumbling the whole way. As I opened the door, I noticed I didn't feel any temperature change like I expected. It had been a cold night, and earlier when I let one of the dogs in, it chilled my exposed skin, as I was only wearing shorts and no shirt. I was shocked to see that I was right back in my living room. I couldn't believe it, so I turned around and opened the door again. Still, I returned to my living room. The screaming was now as loud as ever, and I covered my ears, sinking to the floor, almost to tears with the cold door on my back. I closed my eyes and sank into a sleep somehow. I awoke on my couch, and my phone was on the floor. I thought the happenings as my dream. I grabbed my phone and it had a text from a named contact that read, "Him." Along with the text reading, "There is no escape. You have come to claim your sanity." Then I could feel the eyes on me, and I ran to my room, which is only separated by a curtain on a rod. I fell in by a drunken haste through the curtain and landed in my bathroom on the tile floor. I got up and went to the window as the screaming started again. I ignored it the best I could, but it was so loud. I broke the screen and crawled out, feeling the cold night air on my skin as I fell. It was dark, and I seemed to fall forever. To my horror, a face appeared in front of me. It was human with sunken eyes that had little white lights in the back and twisted long teeth that shone through its smile. I went to scream, but it was cut short as I landed hard on my kitchen floor. The wood under my face felt oddly warm, and I put my hands under me to support myself to get up. Then the carpet started to move as I was breathing. I ran into the living room right ahead of me. It was the actual living room. My heart was pounding as I couldn't believe what was happening. I got another text and I pulled out my phone to read the him contact had sent me another spine-chilling message. This one read, "There is no escape. Check the time." Sure enough, my phone's clock read 9:30 p.m. The time it was when I started drinking. I pressed the call button and didn't even ring as a voice that was gruff spoke through the speaker. "We know how to take you. Just give up." I looked around as I heard scratching from every direction. My heart felt as if it was about to burst, and my head was throbbing. I was dripping a cold sweat as fingers poured through the wall. They were bloody and unusually long for human fingers. I tried the last room I could, my mum's room. I went in there to find the creature in complete darkness, its smile dripping with a dark liquid that flooded the floor. Small hands shot through. Rats fell from the ceiling and on my shoulder. I started screaming, but nothing came out. I could feel their warm, wet fur on my shoulder and hear them. I started kicking and thrashing at them. Then I looked back at the creature as it opened its mouth to send more ooze onto the floor. The hands crawled to small, proclaimed dolls. The soulless glass eyes looked into mine as they in unison made a giggling sound that transformed into a demonic laugh. I started to walk back as their eyes started tearing blood with their thin smile stayed. The rats were crawling at my feet as I turned and ran the creature in the middle of the room, not moving. I was back in the living room and slamming the door behind me, crying in fear. Then I felt a hand on my face, cold as ice, as it let blood drip down my cheek onto my chest. I leaned forward and screamed, crawling away from it. I looked around, sobbing as I saw the fingers now had arms and hands. They were muscled all the way up to their wrists. The room seemed to breathe as it expanded and shrunk. I could feel a hot air come from the open doorways that seemed to burn my skin. I crawled to the bathroom and ended up in my bedroom. Bright red eyes seemed to cover the windows and the screaming started again. I was scared, confused and hurting from my head to my overwhelmed heart as I backed my back against the wall and covered my ears crying. I felt a vibration on my leg and pulled out my phone. It was him. The message was sent and it gave me a bigger panic. It read, "This is only the beginning." I tried 911 even though I knew it wouldn't work. When I typed the 3 numbers, it wouldn't appear on the screen. I begged with whatever was there to let me go, and I heard a voice that seemed to come from my own thoughts, but I knew was not my own, say, "Your sanity will be ours." I ran back out of the room and came into the living room. I ran towards the door of my mum's room and swung it open. I screamed as I fell into the black ooze. I expected thick slimy goo, but I fell fall into darkness. The creature started appearing everywhere and reaching its abnormally long hands at me, barely missing. I went to scream at it, but my voice was gone. Then I hit something cold and covered in rocks. I was in my driveway and my mum was pulling up. I got up and moved out of her way. She asked why I was crying, but smelled the beer and put it off as me being dramatic. I begged her to not go inside and she ignored me walking in the door. I followed her as she went in with nothing happening. I followed, then the creature smiled at me from the ceiling and I was back in the basement. I heard my mother's cry for help as it tortured her for what seemed like days, sending body part after body part. Here I lay on the cold cement floor after what feels like weeks. I haven't gotten anything to eat or drink from the creature. He leaves me down there in my drunken haze. My phone still charged with the time 9:30 PM at the top. My mum's head on a spike as its twisted features stuck in fear, staring at me. My brothers had returned home. I could hear them, but they were spared. I could hear the cops search the house. I could hear them in the basement, but could not see them. I screamed and screamed and nothing good happening. They found Mum's body, but no head. I could hear them and how they blamed me. I've tried to kill myself at least 100 times. Every time appearing the damp dark hell with that damn monster grinning at me. He talks to me. He tells me I can help him rule. I just have to give my sanity to him. He says I can torture whoever I want. With every time I refuse his offer, he sends something new and twisted after me. Last time, it was my mother's head telling me how I could have saved her. It then opened its jaw to where I could fit my head in it. It then let locusts out, eating me alive. Of course I came back here. I've cried all my tears and now numb to everything. The creature's deal seeming like my only escape. And you know what? I know a few people who could die.